You've been lied to. Mentors, guides, the ones you trust, they've shackled you with weakness. Loyalty, honesty, they're traps. Your power has been stolen, and you've been conditioned to beg for scraps. Everything you were taught to admire was selected to keep you predictable. Your mentors didn't lie to you outright. They did something far more effective. They filtered reality. They handed you a lens polished with morality, cooperation, and patience, then sent you into a world that runs on leverage, asymmetry, and force. That lens is your first liability. You were trained to interpret outcomes through effort and intention. Work hard, be loyal, stay consistent, and the system will notice. This framework produces compliance, not dominance. It creates men who wait to be chosen instead of men who take position. The lens rewards internal virtue while the world rewards external consequence. That mismatch is where most men quietly lose. Mentorship, as you experienced it, was never designed to make you dangerous. Dangerous men destabilize hierarchies. They question assumptions, test boundaries, and refuse to internalize guilt as control. So the lens you inherited taught you to equate restraint with superiority and obedience with intelligence. You were conditioned to believe that visibility without permission is arrogance, that ambition without approval is recklessness. That belief system benefits everyone above you. The first fracture begins when you notice who thrives. Not who is praised, but who is protected. Not who speaks the most truth, but who controls silence. The men with real power do not explain themselves. They do not seek moral validation. They act, then let outcomes rewrite the narrative. Meanwhile, those trained under the inherited lens keep waiting for recognition that never arrives. Your mentors understood this distinction. They simply never forced you to confront it, because forcing you would require stripping away your comfort with being liked. It would mean teaching you that most rules are provisional, enforced only downward. It would mean admitting that ethics are often retrofitted explanations for victories already secured. Instead, they taught you to be reasonable. Reasonable men are easy to manage. They negotiate against themselves. They reveal intentions early. They hesitate when certainty is required. The inherited lens frames hesitation as wisdom, patience as maturity, and silence as humility. In reality, these traits only convert to power when paired with threat. Without threat, they are submitted in slow motion. This chapter is not about rejecting morality. It is about rejecting naivete. There is a difference. Morality chosen is strength. Morality imposed is a leash. The lens you were given never asked you to choose. It assumed compliance was your natural state. That assumption shaped how you speak, how you move, how you evaluate risk. Notice how often you seek alignment before action. Notice how often you explain yourself to people who have no authority over outcomes. Notice how deeply you've internalized the fear of being misunderstood, labeled, or excluded. That fear did not arise naturally. It was installed as a safeguard against independence. Power requires misalignment. It requires the willingness to be temporarily misunderstood, selectively opaque, strategically unfair. The inherited lens calls this selfish. The world calls it effective. To shatter the lens, you must stop asking whether something is acceptable and start asking whether it is decisive. You must stop filtering your behavior through imagined judgment and start filtering it through consequence. Who gains leverage? Who loses options? Who is forced to react? This shift is violent, not emotionally, but cognitively. It destabilizes your identity because your identity was built around approval metrics. You were rewarded for being reliable, ethical, and cooperative. Those traits made you valuable, not powerful. There is a difference, and the world exploits it ruthlessly. By the end of this chapter, the goal is not confidence. It is suspicion. Suspicion of advice that sounds virtuous but produces passivity. Suspicion of systems that praise you without promoting you. Suspicion of mentors who teach effort but avoid teaching leverage. Once the lens cracks, you cannot unsee the imbalance. You begin to recognize that most men are not failing because they are incompetent, but because they are overconditioned, trained to play a game that no longer exists, judged by rules enforced only when convenient. This is the beginning, not of growth, but of recalibration. The moment you stop interpreting the world as it was explained to you, and start seeing it as it operates. Control is most effective when it feels like guidance. What restrained you was never discipline or lack of talent. It was selective disclosure. You were taught how to act, but never when. You were trained in effort, not in timing. This omission is not accidental. It is the central mechanism by which hierarchies reproduce themselves. Power does not hide information. It withholds context. Your mentors gave you rules without thresholds. Work harder. Be patient. Earn trust. These instructions sound neutral, even benevolent, but without conditions they become traps. How hard is hard enough? How patient is strategic versus terminal? When does trust convert to leverage instead of exposure? Those answers were never forced into you, because once you understand thresholds, you stop being manageable. The silent mechanism operates through moral delay. You are told that restraint will be rewarded later, that compliance is an investment, that endurance proves worthiness. This keeps you stationary while others advance. The system does not need to oppress you. It simply needs you to wait. Waiting men do not disrupt power flows. Observe how often escalation is framed as immaturity. Assertiveness becomes aggression. Boundary setting becomes ego. Strategic withdrawal becomes cowardice. These moral labels are not about behavior, they are about preserving equilibrium. They teach you to self-censor at precisely the moment when force would be effective. Meanwhile, those above you violate the same rules with impunity. They interrupt, they reposition, they take credit, they abandon sinking alliances. Their actions are later justified as leadership or decisiveness. The rule is not morality. The rule is the outcome. Morality is applied after the fact to stabilize the narrative. The silent mechanism also exploits your desire to be seen as good. Good men are predictable. They broadcast intentions early, announce plans prematurely, and over-communicate to appear transparent. Transparency without power is exposure. It allows others to prepare countermeasures while you remain locked into consistency. Notice how rarely you were taught about strategic silence, about acting without announcement, about letting others misinterpret you until results force reinterpretation. Silence is dangerous because it removes social feedback loops. Without feedback, you must rely on internal calibration, and that produces independence. Independence is destabilizing. Mentorship systems prefer linear progression. Clear steps, clear approval points, visible milestones. This creates the illusion of fairness while masking bottlenecks. Advancement is not blocked by incompetence. It is throttled by access. The silent mechanism ensures you focus on improving within your lane instead of questioning why the lane exists. You were taught to perfect execution, not to challenge structure. This is why you feel a constant tension, effort without acceleration, loyalty without protection, competence without authority. The system praises your reliability while quietly extracting surplus value. You become indispensable but not irreplaceable. Useful, but not sovereign. The mechanism tightens when you internalize guilt for wanting more. Ambition becomes something to justify rather than assume. You begin to ask permission for escalation. You wait for signals that never come, because the signal itself would dissolve the hierarchy. Those who understand the mechanism behave differently. They move before consensus. They create facts, then let institutions adjust. They do not ask whether they are allowed, they test whether they can be stopped. This is the unspoken distinction between those who are guided and those who rule. This chapter's function is exposure. To make visible what was hidden by politeness and pedagogy. Once you see that omission is the primary weapon, you stop blaming yourself for stagnation. You redirect attention from self-improvement to situational dominance. The moment you ask, "What am I not being told?" you exit the control loop. Once the mechanism is understood, the patterns become obvious. Systems do not shape individuals randomly. They produce repeatable archetypes. These archetypes are not accidents of personality. They are outcomes of conditioning. You were guided into a role long before you were aware there was a script. The first is the loyal instrument. This archetype is built on reliability and moral consistency. He is rewarded with responsibility, not authority. He becomes the backbone of operations, the one who keeps things running. His loyalty is praised publicly and exploited privately. The system invests just enough affirmation to keep him stable, never enough power to make him autonomous. The loyal instrument is dangerous only to himself. He absorbs risk without owning upside. He believes endurance will convert to recognition. It rarely does. When resources tighten, he is the first to be overworked and the last to be protected. The second archetype is the moral sentinel. This man internalizes the rules so deeply that he enforces them on others. He becomes the voice of restraint, the reminder of how things are done. His identity fuses with righteousness. This makes him predictable and easily neutralized. He will sabotage his own leverage to preserve moral coherence. The system loves the moral sentinel. He polices deviation, suppresses ambition, and discourages rupture. He believes he is guarding standards, but he is actually guarding ceilings. His reward is social approval, not strategic position. The third archetype is the competent subordinate. Highly skilled, adaptable, and self-aware, yet permanently deferred. He is told he is next in line, almost there, on track. This archetype is maintained through proximity to power without access to it. Close enough to see how things work, never close enough to influence them. The competent subordinate is kept hopeful. Hope is the leash. As long as the promise remains vague and future-oriented, he will not exit or disrupt. The system does not need to promote him, it only needs to delay him. All three archetypes share one feature: they were taught to equate identity with function. Who they are is what they provide. This makes them legible, trackable, and replaceable. Power prefers legibility in subordinates. Illegibility creates risk. Ask yourself which archetype you were trained into. The answer is uncomfortable, because recognition feels like indictment. You were not unlucky. You were prepared. Notice who does not fit these archetypes. The ones who move sideways instead of upward. The ones who violate expectations without apology. The ones who disappear and reappear with leverage. These men were never groomed. They were tolerated until they couldn't be ignored. The system cannot replicate them because they do not follow scripts. They do not trade identity for approval. They treat roles as temporary camouflage, not as self-definition. This is why they are labeled difficult, unorthodox, or risky. Those labels are warnings, not critiques. The purpose of this chapter is not to shame you. Shame is a control emotion. The purpose is to force disidentification. You cannot escape an archetype you still admire. As long as you take pride in being reliable, moral, or patient without leverage, you will defend the very role that limits you. Once you see the archetype, you can step out of it. But stepping out requires loss. Loss of praise. Loss of predictability. Loss of the narrative that made you feel safe. Most men refuse this step. They cling to the archetype because it provides psychological shelter. But shelter is not sovereignty. It is a waiting room. In the next phase, the threat becomes undeniable. History, nature, and human behavior will strip away any remaining illusion that these archetypes survive long-term. History does not reward intention. It records the outcome. Every civilization, every hierarchy, every collapsed order repeats the same pattern. Those who secured leverage survived. Those who appealed to virtue were remembered only as cautionary examples. This is not cynicism. It is pattern recognition. Empires were not built by the most ethical men, but by the most adaptive. They expanded through timing, force concentration, and narrative control. Morality followed conquest, not the other way around. Codes of honor, laws, and traditions were installed after dominance was established, then weaponized to maintain it. Those born under these systems were taught to revere the code, never to question its origin. You inherited the code without inheriting the conquest. This is the core threat. You are playing by rules written to stabilize power you do not possess. Human nature has not evolved past this. Strip away technology and language, and the same dynamics remain. Status is allocated through dominance displays, coalition control, and resource asymmetry. Pretending otherwise does not civilize the game, it only blinds the player. Observe any crisis. War, economic collapse, institutional failure. The masks fall quickly. Loyalty dissolves. Ethics become negotiable. Those who prepared for power adapt. Those who prepared for fairness freeze. The world does not pause to reward virtue under pressure. It reallocates advantage. The historical record is brutal in its consistency. Skilled but compliant men are used until they are obsolete. Principled men without force are overthrown or ignored. The men who endure are those who understand that reputation is a tool, not a mirror. They adopt morality strategically, discard it tactically, and reframe it retrospectively. This is why power appears hypocritical. It is not hypocrisy, it is prioritization. Survival first, justification later. You were likely taught that integrity guarantees safety. History shows the opposite. Integrity without leverage invites exploitation. Treaties are broken. Alliances shift. Promises dissolve when conditions change. This is not betrayal, it is an incentive to respond to the environment. The deeper threat is psychological. When men believe the world is fair, they personalize failure. They assume they are flawed, not mispositioned. This keeps them compliant even as evidence accumulates. They double down on virtue, hoping the system will eventually correct itself. It never does. Those who rise understand that systems are not moral entities. They are arenas. Arenas reward performance, not intention. The crowd may cheer virtue, but the throne responds to force. This is as true in modern institutions as it was in ancient courts. The language has softened, the logic has not. This chapter exists to sever your emotional attachment to fairness as an organizing principle. Fairness is a story told to prevent unrest. Stability requires belief. Power requires clarity. Once clarity arrives, belief becomes optional. If this unsettles you, it should. The discomfort is the mind recalibrating away from fantasy. You are confronting the possibility that your suffering was not noble, just useful to others. That your restraint was not maturity, just delayed agency. The final realization is this: the world is indifferent to your self-concept. It does not care how you see yourself, only how you constrain or expand others' options. Once you accept this, you stop demanding justice and start designing positions. That acceptance is the threshold. Beyond it, behavior must change or collapse follows. Once illusion is stripped away, behavior must become surgical. This chapter is not about improvement. It is about reallocation. You stop investing energy where it produces validation and start investing where it produces constraint on others. The first shift is silence. Not passivity, but opacity. You reduce explanation to the minimum required to move. Explanation invites negotiation. Negotiation invites delay. Delay benefits those already positioned. Silence forces others to reveal their assumptions while you preserve optionality. You were trained to justify. That training ends here. Next is selective reliability. You do not withdraw competence. You withdraw predictability. You remain capable but inconsistent in availability. This destabilizes dependency structures. When others cannot forecast your response, they recalibrate around you. Uncertainty creates leverage. Then comes repositioning. You stop seeking approval from those who cannot grant access. Attention is a finite resource. You redirect it upward or laterally, never downward. This is not arrogance. It is logistics. Time spent explaining yourself to the powerless is time stolen from advancement. Strategic reorientation also requires emotional austerity. You reduce visible reactions. Praise, criticism, inclusion, exclusion, none receive immediate response. Emotional restraint is not morality. It is camouflage. It prevents others from mapping your incentives. You also abandon moral signaling. You do not advertise virtue. Advertised virtue is insurance for the insecure. Power reads it as compensation. Let outcomes imply standards. Silence paired with consistency confuses those who rely on narrative dominance. Another critical shift is exit readiness. You maintain the capacity to disengage without collapse. Dependence is visible long before it is admitted. If your survival requires continued approval, you are already compromised. Sovereignty begins with the ability to leave without spectacle. This reorientation will be punished socially. You will be labeled distant, changed, difficult. These labels are pressure tactics designed to restore your previous utility. Do not correct them. Correction signals concern. Concern signals vulnerability. Instead, allow misinterpretation. Misinterpretation is protective. It keeps others guessing and prevents preemptive containment. Most importantly, you stop seeking coherence between identity and action. Identity is fluid. Action is situational. Men who insist on being consistent are easy to manipulate. Men who adapt appear unstable to those who need predictability. That instability is your shield. This chapter installs a new operating principle. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be effective. Effectiveness is measured in options, not approval. By the end of this phase, your behavior will feel unfamiliar, even to you. That is expected. You are exiting a conditioned pattern. The discomfort is the cost of autonomy. The final step is irreversible. It requires the destruction of the old self-image entirely. Not modification. Termination. The final barrier is not external resistance. It is the identity you have been protecting. The version of you shaped by mentors, institutions, and approval economies cannot coexist with sovereignty. One must be buried. This is not metaphorical. Your inherited identity is a liability profile. It advertises values, limits, and thresholds. Others learned how to extract from you by observing who you believed yourself to be. As long as that self-image remains intact, so does your exploitability. You were taught to define yourself by consistency, to be someone. This freezes behavior. Power requires modular identity. You are not a fixed character. You are a system of responses. Systems adapt. Characters break. Identity termination begins with severing emotional allegiance to your former virtues. Loyalty, patience, humility, these are not discarded, but demoted. They become tools, not commandments. Tools are applied when useful and ignored when costly. Commandments enslave. Next comes internal permission. You stop asking whether you are allowed to act. Permission-seeking is the psychological residue of childhood authority. Adults with power test boundaries. They do not await authorization. If you can act without consequence, that is permission. This stage feels like isolation because it removes familiar mirrors. People no longer reflect back the image you curated. That absence is necessary. Identity fed by reflection is dependency. Identity fed by outcome is sovereignty. Reconstruction is minimalistic. You build a self-concept around capability, not character. Around options, not narratives. You are what you can enforce, withdraw, or negotiate. Everything else is decoration. This does not make you cruel. It makes you unromantic. You no longer confuse intention with impact. You no longer sacrifice position to preserve self-image. You accept that being misunderstood is a structural cost, not a personal failure. The men who cannot complete this step retreat. They rationalize. They claim balance or authenticity. These are euphemisms for fear of loss. Loss of praise. Loss of belonging. Loss of the old story. But stories do not protect you. Position does. By the end of this chapter, the old identity no longer feels like home. That is the signal. Homes are static. Power is mobile. You stop asking who you are and start asking what configuration serves the moment. What replaces the old self is not a persona, but a posture. Calm. Observant. Economical. You do not rush to fill the silence. You do not rush to be seen. You allow others to overextend while you remain unread. This is the quiet edge. Not dominance displayed, but dominance implied. Only a small number proceed beyond this point. For them, one final calibration remains.